Right, on with the action. Just before we get in amongst Fans Pulse Lap 3, hallelujah, it has taken the best part of 8 weeks. At long last, we are delighted. I am super excited. If I could play a trumpet or a trombone, I would do it. We have received a WhatsApp voice message, courtesy of Simon from Mildenhall. Simon, you are a legend. Thank you very much, Simon. Simon was the bravest 360 speedster. He has sent us in a voice message, and Simon poses a question to this week's panel. So we're going to listen to Simon's message right now, gents, and I'll ask you to comment. So here, Simon from Mildenhall, come on down.
Simon from Mildenhall here. Quick question for you. Do you think that the term GP competitor / ex-GP competitor is worth the paper it's written on? The reason why I asked this question is that I saw an ex-GP star struggle to score more than a couple of points this week. It was really, really poor. Now, if we go back 25 years ago, I'm looking at the top 10 or so riders in the Speedway Grand Prix at that time. So you had Tony Ricardson, Golob, Crump, Adams, Sullivan, the Carlson brothers, Nicky Pedersen, Mark Laram, Hamill, Hancock. Those guys were all simultaneously able to perform in 3 divisions plus the World Championship, and we've got supposed stars descending to our leagues from the World Championship, and they're struggling to keep their initial starting averages. How's the standard in this country gone up so much?
Simon from Mildenhall, thank you very much. That was a great question, put very well indeed. So, Carol, I'm going to ask you to come in first. So Simon, he didn't identify the rider. Thank you, Simon. But obviously, a rider of some note and some reputation and some ability, who didn't impress Simon very much in terms of his recent scoring on a British track. Has Simon been a little bit hard on that individual, Carol?
It's a difficult one, because obviously the riders come over. They don't come over to put in bad performances. Nobody wants to do that. Okay, things don't always work out. As we all know, on race nights, there might be something that's not quite right. Yes, you would expect more from a superstar Grand Prix rider sometimes, but everybody has bad nights. They can't be perfect every night. But I look at it: are they come just for the money? No, because there's not the money in British Speedway for them to just warrant coming over and sitting on a bike and doing nothing. So they're here to try. They're here to do a job. Like I say, sometimes that doesn't work out for whatever reason, and you put it down as a bad night. If that's a continual thing, then that's something completely different. You can have an off night, as anybody has. So you can accept that. Yes, you can look at a rider and go, he's not trying tonight for whatever reason, and you can see that in the way he's riding, the way he's sitting on the bike, and in his attitude. But a lot of the supporters don't see that side, whereas we do. From the promotion team manager side, we can see what he's like in the pits. They can only see what he's like on a bike, and I can get where they're coming from. I've been in a position that we've booked guests, and it's like they've rode for 4 or 5 points, and you think, was you really trying? They're on a guarantee, so it's not a case of they're going to turn up and get 100 quid a point. Most guests ride for a guarantee, so they look at it and go, 4 or 5 points will do me. From that side, but they do have off nights, and I get the frustration, but I also can see it from the rider side as well.
Yeah, Stuart, to bring you in, Simon listed off a super impressive list of riders from 10, 20 years ago who plied their trade in the UK, and by and large they were consistent performers domestically, and they still did the business on internationally and in Grand Prix. But But even Tony Rickardson was only human, Stuart, right? He could have an off night.
That's right. Everyone is entitled to an off night now and again. I mean, you don't go to a track to have an off night. Well, I certainly never did. I mean, and if a lot of the riders that were around when I was riding, whether they be British riders or Aussie riders, Americans, Swedes, whatever it might be, they didn't go to have an off night. They went there to score points and to win races, especially if they rode in GPs as well. Because if they're riding a GP, you generally been riding in Poland, and the Polish clubs watch the scores from all the riders, and they will comment on it. They will pick them up on it, and they will say, what happened? Why didn't you score 10 points or whatever? What happened there? So you do try. So you don't go to have an off night. I never did, and I like to think other riders are in the same sort of frame of mind. That you've got the same attitude. Carl covered pretty much everything there. It happens. It happens. It's one of them. You can see if someone's not trying. You can tell that. You can tell it in their attitude, as I said, on the bike and off the bike. So if that's the case, then fair enough. You might want to pull them about it, but I've never noticed, never known of a rider that's no turn up, especially in a different country if they come from Poland or wherever, and not try.
Nigel, Simon posed the question right at the end there that he asked it, has the standard of British Speedway increased that much that that even a former GP rider might struggle these days, or as Robbo and Carol have said, is it most likely just to have been a bit of an off night for that particular individual?
Well, I don't think the opposition has got better in British League. I certainly don't. I think some of the problem, they fly in and they fly out. The foreign boys nowadays fly in and fly out. So I'm led to believe. I think that's right. I'm not sure. Years ago, when Robbo was saying about Greg Hancock and all of them lads they all lived in England though, didn't they? Or 95% of them would stay in England. And we're a lot more loyal to the clubs. I do think a lot of the foreign riders nowadays, they aren't loyal. And I hate to say it, but they're on the nice guarantees. And they come and they've got the guarantees. Also, the tracks are a little bit different. They're not the big wide open spaces here they are in Poland, are they? Peterborough, great racetrack. It wasn't a wide track. We're going into that first turn at Peterborough, when you got four going in there together, they want a lot of room. In Poland, there's such big, wide open spaces, aren't they? And I think they get a bit of a shock to the system when they come over here and go to these tracks. Because, you've got Bellevue, which everybody apparently likes Bellevue, big, wide open spaces, more of your Polish track, I believe. But some of your other tracks, your Leicesters, you've got to turn the bike hard. I think it's totally different riding style to how it is in Poland or wherever. And they fly in and they fly out. And I do think sometimes England gets used. And I think we're letting them use us as well. I don't know, might be a bit strong, that I don't know. But I do think England gets used and abused at times. To my mind, England should say, "Sad Poland, we can't run Speedway like Poland do. And I think we've got to run English Speedway as it can be run." I don't know. I might be wrong again, as I say, but early on in the season we had championship riders championship or something early on in the season.
That was in the championship, not the Premiership. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, what's that all about? Having early on in the season, it used to be late on in the season. last month of the season, they used to have it, and the top riders from each club would go and ride in it or whatever. Now it's in bloody April. What good's that? That's never right, is it? But we're having to do it, aren't we? The British final, a Monday night. It's done because of Poland on a Sunday or whatever. But I think it's time British Speedway had to just look after themselves a little bit more. And if we have to forgo some of them top riders to build it back up, maybe that's what needs to happen. I don't know, because say what you like, I don't think bringing your top riders in, Ty Woofington at Sheffield, obviously there is the odd club, I think Ipswich do okay, don't they? But bringing the big guns in hasn't necessarily mean it brings the big crowds in. So I don't know. Maybe English Speedway needs to step back a bit and, I don't know, try and go more localish for you. And there are some good English lads coming through, aren't there?
Yes, so we've talked about that in previous weeks. They need the chance, and put them in and give them the chance. Give them the chance. I know it's going backwards for a year or two, but maybe that's what it has to do, step back to move forward. But I don't believe that. I don't know, the foreign riders, they come over, some of them, the good ones. You had Thomas Gollum came over and he did very well, didn't he? Sat Fooding does very well, doesn't he? So your good riders cream will always rise to the top, won't it? There you are, Simon and Mildenhall. See what you started, Simon. So that was a full answer, Simon, and I think you got plenty of buck for your bang, or whatever, or bang for your buck, whatever the expression is. But listen, thanks for asking the question, Simon. And we are going to talk about in Fans Pulse Lap 3, we are going to have a bit of a focus on British Speedway and what that offers riders, in terms of development, etc. So thank you, Simon, very much for being the first person ever to submit a voice note message. And you too could do what Simon did. So please don't be as afraid to send it in a voice note through our dedicated WhatsApp. You see the number on screen, or you did. You'll see it on screen. It's 0333 772 40 46. Back on with your discussion topics. Already we are entering Fans Pulse Lap 3, an interesting one. I hope you will agree at home. We're going to have a chat about the value to riders, at least, of racing regularly here in Britain. We're asking, is British best? Gents, Stuart, I'll bring you in first of all, and I think this subject matter, this discussion topic, kind of leans into, I think, something that I've learned or read many times over the years, that riders who make it internationally, GP quality riders, quite often praise their sort of formative years, learning their trade in Britain. And kind of accredit Britain and British Speedway with helping them develop as riders, right? And I don't know if you get any particular insight into that, Stuart. But first things first, is that something you would subscribe to, that riding British Speedway and the variety of tracks, etc., strengthened you and developed you as a better rider?
It certainly did in the past. I'm not really sure if that's the case now. There was the variation in the UK tracks as so much, was so different. Every track you go to was so different, and that really, you really had to learn how to ride every track. There were some were tight, some were wide, some were really narrow, some were bumpy, some were smooth, some had dirt on, some didn't. There was such a variation in them all that certain styles what didn't suit you, so you had to change your style, I guess, really to each track and adapt. And I think it was the quick adaptation that helped with other tracks in foreign countries as well.
Carol, just to bring you in, approximately speaking, a Polish tracks are much of a muchness, Swedish tracks are much of a muchness, Danish tracks potentially the same. Uli would have a view on that, but British tracks, you can't apply that same accusation around British tracks, right? Because the variety is immense in this small island.
Yeah, every track in the UK is different. You couldn't overlay one track with another and it'd be identical. So yeah, I think it's certainly the times of the Hancocks, and the Ricardsons and going back before the Nielsen's. I think they rode in the UK because the tracks were so varied, and you did learn your trade on the British tracks, and they've always said that benefited them throughout their careers. Now there's more money in Poland. Everybody wants to go to Poland. It's all about Poland. They're picking now our 16, 17-year-old riders up and taking them to Poland into their under 21s because that's where the money's at. But the tracks are just fast, flat, all the same. So you're losing that track craft. I think it's just whoever's fastest and whoever's lightest will go quickest. And it wasn't always the case in the UK. We've talked about it before about the way Scott Nicholls can ride, the smaller tracks. If the British final was at Leicester, Ipswich, we know Scotty would be a 7, he'd be 8, 9, 10 times British champion. He doesn't like Bellevue, and they've moved it to Bellevue. It's fast. It's not his sort of track, but it suits other people. So, yeah, they all differ. Like Stuart says, riders ride them differently. Dan Bewley goes well round Edinburgh, goes well round Bellevue. Izzy is good round Leicester. So yeah, they're learning their trade on these tracks, but I think that's gone now.
Nigel, just to bring you on in this, so apart from the sort of physicality of the tracks that we've been touching on, and it's maybe less of a boast these days, but in its pomp, and you could race multiple nights of the week every week in Britain, right? There was meetings regularly, so it would be unusual to only have one meeting in a week, perhaps. Whereas out in Poland, riders they typically only have one meeting a week in Poland. Same in Sweden, same in Denmark. So, is the rigour or was the rigour of British Speedway of benefit to riders in so much as it gave them much more bike time, as opposed to anything else?
Yeah, because in them days people didn't need to go to Poland and everywhere, did they? Because they could fill the fixtures and earn the money in England. Whereas now they've had to start going to Poland, Sweden, wherever, Denmark, wherever they go, to fulfill the diary. That's really what it is now. But years ago, they always used to say, I'm going back plenty years here, but they always used to say to be a world champion and a top class rider, you needed to ride in England. Now, what do they say? If you want to be a world champion and a top class rider nowadays, you've got to go and ride in Poland. That's just changed. Times have changed. One of the trickiest tracks, Eastbourne. Eastbourne, great little track, I used to think, but there was not much room there, and you get your foreign guys coming over. They'd wonder what they were coming to, a bit of a training track compared to what they have in Poland. But again, like Robbo and Carl says, your Greg Hancocks, your Billies, your Billy Hamills, Tony Ricardson, all them lot, they all came over here, became top riders in this country and riding in Poland and all became world champions. But they did they were over here for a start, weren't they? Riding all different shapes, sizes of tracks, so I don't know. It's just nowadays they seem to say you've got to go to Poland to be a world champion. And I can quite see that, really, because they're such big, fast, pacey places, aren't they? A bit like Bellevue. That's why everybody likes Bellevue, isn't it? Yeah. Because plenty of room, big, fast, racy places. They like it, so I don't know. But it's just times have changed, haven't they? Engines have changed, times have changed. Just how it is.
Carol, we talked earlier on about weather watch and the weather strategy in Speedway, and we talked about how technology has improved, the accuracy of predicting weather through satellite technology and stuff has advanced so much. And I don't know if there's anything in what I'm about to suggest, but has international travel developed and so much that for riders to fly in and out of Britain, in amongst Scandinavia and Poland, etc. Is it much easier to fit into a rider's schedule than perhaps it was 10 or 20 or even 30 years ago?
Yeah, I would have thought so, because I think nowadays there's more flights in and out of the UK. I wouldn't say they're cheaper, but there's certainly more flights than they can fly into. If they're running at Glasgow, they can fly in. Local. We've had riders fly in. When we've been on the Northern Tour and picked them up. It's easier to fly in and out, I think, now. Whereas obviously 25, 30 years ago, there wasn't as much air travel, was there, as what there is nowadays, and certainly not at the cost it is now. And I think that's why the riders were based in the UK, because there were so many meetings here, and it was a case of we're just going to fly to Poland or Denmark or Sweden one day a week, for one night. So it was reversed, wasn't it? They was flying in for one day there, but living here. It's like Nigel says, the times have changed, and I think it's gone role reversal now, and we're the minions of the speedway world.
Well, you see that, Callum. Minions. Yeah, I was actually trying to think in terms of what world standing within the speedway world. Poland undoubtedly are on that top step of the podium, right? But how does British Speedway compare to Czech Speedway or Danish Speedway or Swedish Speedway in terms of everything, in terms of the standard of Speedway, in terms of the variety, in terms of the number of clubs, etc. I would contest that Britain might not be far off second spot.
We are. We're certainly getting back up there. Obviously, it's all about money, and Poland, we know, pay the most money. Sweden was second, and then Denmark, UK was on a par with each other. And I think over the last probably 5 years, as we've seen, Sweden have dropped off a bit financially. A few clubs have struggled paying riders, and they've decided, we're going to do England rather than Sweden. But then you get this, if Sweden starts slightly later, as we've got, obviously we've just lost one rival, Birmingham have, that's done a part of the season, and apparently it was a deal made at the start of the season that he would only do so many meetings, and then disappeared because his other league started, which is going to earn him more money. So you do get that, even now. But yeah, obviously the British riders that are here, and then the top talent that's now coming back is good for British Speedway. So yeah, it's now pushing us back up to probably second position now.
Yeah. Stuart, I'm thinking from a rider's perspective. So a Bartosz Smarzlik or a Martin Vaculik or someone like that. Why might they be tempted to come and ride in Britain? So we've talked about the variety of tracks and how that can help to develop your skill as a rider. We've talked about the number of fixtures. Is comparative, probably more favourable than some of the other nations. But is it fair to say, Stuart, and it's always been the case, that the sheer standard of speedway in Britain, in the top flight and even in the so-called second division, it's always been a competitive level of speedway in the UK, and as a rider, you're going to learn, and you're going to have to compete for your points money, right?
Yeah, definitely, yes. I mean, the standard of the British Speedway is still pretty high. It's still good. Whether it's as high as the top league in Poland, the top league in the UK, probably is not quite there, but it is still a high standard. We still do have good riders here. Whether I haven't really seen any Swedish or Danish teams, so I couldn't really compare it to that at the moment. But yeah, the standard's there. It's not. I don't think the standard in over the UK now is like it used to be in even sort of 25 years or so ago. It's not. It has dropped off a little bit, I think, but there is still a few of the top riders have been attracted back over the last 4, 5, 6 years, whatever it is, which has really helped. It's been a good in as far as lifting the standard. Whether it's affected crowd, I don't really know. Like, that was what was said earlier. It doesn't seem to affect the crowd so much, but it does raise the standard a bit, because the way I've always thought of it, you ride and race to the standard of riders you're racing against on the track. So if you're racing against top world-class riders, you need to raise your game to ride to the same standard if you want to win.
Yeah.
And that does it does resonate a little bit with. We've got a few good British guys coming up, and quite a few youngsters in the pipeline with the big, with the sort of training schools and things that people put on. So hopefully, when these guys will help keep the standard and raise it a bit more.
Thank you, Stuart. 100%. There's no easy pickings in British Speedway, and I think we've chatted around some of the key component parts as to what makes British Speedway a little bit special, and certainly a training ground, a breeding ground for young talent on these shores, and for foreign riders to come and ply their trade and develop themselves as riders. Listen, 360 Speedsters, would be super interested to hear your views on the current stature of British Speedway, how it compares to those other Speedway nations that we know and love. And as ever, please don't hesitate. Drop us your comments on YouTube or on any of our social media channels.